and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. I'm Jennifer Oraqua, COO at Projections, and your host for today's discussion. Now, innovation is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and it should. It is, or it should be, a critical part of any business. But to really make an impact, innovation has to become a habit, and it has to be fully integrated into your corporate culture. For many, developing a culture of innovation can be a challenge, but it's a good first step toward making a reality in your company to listen to today's episode. Joining us today is Natalie Painchaud. She is the Director of Learning at management consulting firm Innovate, and she is one of the authors of Eat, Sleep, Innovate, How to Make Creativity an Everyday Habit Inside Your Organization. I'm so glad you're here today, Natalie.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. I just have to say, I'm super excited to talk about this today. At Projections, we've worked hard to make sure innovation, both with regard to our products and innovative problem solving for our clients, is at the core of everything we do. So I just wanted to start first with the book. Eat, Sleep, Innovate is a collaborative effort. Can you tell us what inspired the book, how it came to be?
The book is a collaboration between my Innovate colleagues, Scott Anthony and Andy Parker, and our client and friend from DBS Bank, Paul Cobbin. The origin traces to a meeting 5 years ago where my co-author Scott met with a senior leadership team of a global logistics company to talk about disruptive forces, how to organize and put in place processes to be successful with innovation, typical work that we do. Mm-hmm. The CEO stopped him and said, "I've read your books. I know what we need to do. We have a separate group pursuing disruptive innovation. What do I do with the other 28,000 people?" This is just a great question, and we didn't have a very good answer. So we put our best thinking on the topic, and we realized it was a question worth answering that needed further exploration. And a few years ago, Paul asked us to do something we didn't know how to do, which is, can you intentionally create a culture of innovation? We worked together in a part of DBS Bank and answered the question with a definitive yes. Yes, you can purposely create a culture of innovation.
So tell me about this culture of innovation. How do you, when you look at a company, how do you define that? How do you know that it's there or it's not there? How would you define that?
Appreciate the question and the value of starting with a common language, because they're really two things that are quite intangible, culture and innovation, and we work to make them tangible. Definition of innovation is something different that creates value. And innovation comes, we see, when organizations follow 5 behaviors. And I'll talk about those in a little bit. Okay. And a culture of innovation is one in which these behaviors come naturally. And they really are part of the way work gets done.
Love that. So why should organizations embrace that innovation culture? What's at stake if they don't?
The challenge is it's not the way it works inside of most organizations. So most organizations have routines, rituals, habits, and they all exist to perpetuate today, not to do something different that creates value. And what's at stake is if organizations don't change, inevitably they will be disrupted. And disruption is not something far out on the horizon, but rather it's happening every day in every industry, changing customer habits, declining customer loyalty, venture investments, new entrants coming in. And in fact, our research from Innovate predicts that half of S&P 500 companies will fall off the index over the next decade. So radical change is coming or is here already.
Sure. And, this year we've all experienced tons of change, so it's almost expected. So now we've discussed innovation in a previous episode of our podcast, our interview with Doug Buse, and we talked about the idea that innovation isn't some magical ability. It's something that can actually be cultivated and learned. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And leaders are responsible for creating a culture where everybody can behave like innovators. One thing our team collectively believes is there's so much untapped innovation potential inside of every person and every organization.
I totally agree with that. I think there's innovation inside us all and creativity inside us all. You talked about in the book, innovative success being attributed to 5 basic behaviors, and you mentioned that a minute ago. Can you go ahead and share those with us?
Would love to. In the work we're privileged to do with our clients, we've identified 5 core behaviors. And what makes these behaviors so accessible is they're not traits, like we just talked about, that only certain people are fortunate to be born with, but rather they're behaviors that can be adopted by anyone, no matter where they sit in the organization at any point in time. The first is to be curious. And what that means is questioning the status quo, looking for different ways to do things. And when you don't have questioning and curiosity in place, you get business as usual. And the
Hmm.
phrase we've all heard before, probably said, I know I have, which is that's just not the way we do things here.
Right.
And so it is really important to ask, how might we do this differently? And then importantly, be open to adopting different approaches.
Hmm.
So the first is curiosity. The second is to be customer obsessed. So to seek to understand what your customer or your colleague or any other stakeholder is looking to get done, to walk in their shoes and understand what's their job to be done, tapping into your empathy and looking at the world through their eyes.
Hmm.
The third, you'll notice the theme here, the next C word, is to be collaborative, bringing together different perspectives, ideas, analogies. I think many of us have seen that innovation magic really happens at the intersections.
Hmm.
The fourth is a bit of a mouthful, but being adept in ambiguity, because every innovation is partially right and partially wrong when the idea comes up. And good innovators ask, what needs to be true for this to be successful? And then they
Hmm.
go out and they run experiments. They prove, they disprove them. And then the last I really love, which is, and it's inspired by a former client of ours from Procter and Gamble, who used to say, to do something different, you need to actually do something. And this is to be empowered. So if you're going to, do something different that creates value, you have to go from an idea on paper to an idea in reality. So those are the 5 behaviors.
I love that. And I particularly love the one about being customer obsessed. That's something that we focus quite a bit on. And, that's what we innovate around most of the time. So you said at least two of those behaviors in the book, you said that they're kind of naturally occurring in all of us, at least as children.
Yes. And I would say all 5 of these behaviors naturally occur to us as children. I mean, if you spend any time with children, they're constantly asking questions, asking why,
Hmm.
running
Hmm.
experiments. I love if you're familiar with the marshmallow challenge,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
how the kindergartners outperform the MBAs because instead of spending all their time planning and jockeying for power, they're focused on running experiments. So
Hmm.
I'd say all 5 of these are naturally occurring.
Interesting. So you also talked in the book about something you called shadow strategies. What is that, and how does that contribute to innovation?
Yes, this ties with that comment I made earlier around business as usual. So the hidden powerful forces that prioritize today over tomorrow. And strategy isn't what you say, it's what you do. So it's what marketing markets, what engineering engineers, what the sales team
Mm.
sells, what finance funds. And all of these things are optimized to make today better and to guarantee, the bottom line. And at the same time, they stand in the way of making tomorrow different.
Mm.
Um, and individuals have these self-imposed constraints, and they're almost like unwritten rules where you say, okay, I don't think we're allowed to do this.
All right, so Natalie, let's go a little bit deeper on this. We talk about shadow strategies. How does that differ from behavior blockers? What are those two different things there?
If you think of shadow strategies as business as usual, or what's keeping the business focused on today, kind of, we also refer to it as institutionalized inertia. Behavioral blockers come into play when you're trying to actively change those behaviors. So let me bring that to life with an example. You might have a goal of being more collaborative. Okay. And DBS Bank actually had this goal. How do we collaborate more? How do we be more agile? That is going to require that we're hearing from every voice when we have a meeting. So we're making
Mhm.
sure we're leaving, no stone unturned. Well, even though they have this goal, something's getting in the way. What's the behavioral blocker? The behavioral blocker is instead of speaking up, people kind of would sit and stew in silence or would think to themselves, my idea is not good enough. I really shouldn't speak up here. The risk
Mm.
is more than the reward. And if you can really zero in on those behavioral blockers of what do people do instead, then you have an opportunity to put an intervention into place that will nudge or encourage that behavior of collaboration, or in this case, speaking up in the meeting.
Interesting. Yeah, that reminds me of a book that we actually read as a company called The Power of Habit, where you have to replace those bad habits with something good. And I can see how those behavior blockers fit into that, where you're kind of saying, well, we're not all going to sit and stew. we're going to do this instead. So I like that idea. I also like the phrase that you used about institutionalized inertia. I think that's something we all need to look for and identify within our own organizations. I know I'm going to definitely use that. So one of the cornerstones of the Eat, Sleep, Innovate program is the use of beans. So pro tip to our audience, that's not the kind that comes in a can. Can you tell us what beans are?
Yes, BEANS stands for Behavior Enablers, Artifacts, and Nudges. And a behavior enabler is some type of direct way to change behavior. That might be a process or a checklist or a coach, for example. The artifacts and nudges are the indirect ways to encourage that behavior. And those might be things that you don't even notice are really happening. It could be some type of visual cue that sits in a meeting room, or more recently, I've seen people with custom Zoom backgrounds to remind them
Mm-hmm.
of what they need to be doing. And it's a fun acronym and a memorable one.
For sure. For sure. Can you give us some examples of your favorite beans?
I sure can. So as I think about being customer obsessed, something we just talked about,
Mm-hmm.
one that I really love is the future press release. This is something that Amazon uses to look at what is the desired outcome from the customer's perspective. So writing a press release in the future can be very motivating to then say, we're doing all this work and it's going towards this ultimate outcome of how we're going to serve our customers. And they can be kind of fun to write and just an easier way to engage people than a boring list of objectives, let's say.
Yeah, that's a fantastic exercise. I love that.
A couple more really like this one is called Lunch Roulette, which is to encourage collaboration. Boehringer Ingelheim has set up, they're a large pharmaceutical company, and they've set up this system whereby if you don't have a lunch buddy, you can say, I'm available for lunch on this day. And it's intentionally creating those serendipitous moments where people get to connect with someone they otherwise wouldn't connect with. And it's a great way to encourage collaboration. And I'd say probably even more helpful in today's world where we have that opportunity to connect from people all over the world doing things virtually.
That's a great example. I love both of those. All right, so Natalie, we're going to take a quick sponsorship break, but when we return, I want to talk about how to jumpstart innovation with a culture sprint. So stay with us.
Are you working to build an employee relations dream team? I've got an in-depth guide that provides the same roadmap used by employers of choice across the country. It reveals the 3 functional areas you must address before you begin building your dream team, gives you detailed job descriptions, and key performance indicators that will make your team a trusted part of top management. Get inspired and meet the needs of your company with this masterful guide to building your employee relations dream team. Download it at unionproof.com/build an employee relations dream team.
We're back with Natalie Painchaud, author of Eat, Sleep, Innovate, How to Make Creativity an Everyday Habit Inside Your Organization. So before the break, we talked about beans and how they enable innovation and how innovation can solve a problem. But how do you determine which problem is worth your team's innovative effort?
I like this question. I was thinking about it, and I actually think beans and this whole approach that we've laid out is relevant to kind of every problem that an organization faces. And this process of understanding what is it that we're striving to do, what's getting in the way and what are we doing instead?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we encourage this? So as I was thinking about this, I said, gosh, I actually think this is relevant to everybody, not just an innovation team. It really is anytime you're going after, trying to do something different that creates value.
Sure, because you only have so much energy and you've got to apply it in the right places. So yeah, I agree with you there. We teased this a little bit going into the break, but tell us what is a culture sprint?
Little plug for the book here. The culture sprint is described in detail in chapter 4 by my colleague, Andy Parker.
Yeah.
And what it is, I'd say a 6 to 8 week sprint. We've, run a few of these with different clients. And it's an opportunity for a team. So it could be a business unit, it could be a small team, it could be a cross-organization team where you've got some type of goal and you're saying, here are the behaviors that we think we need to be successful in achieving this goal. And kind of the first phase of it is what I'll call the pre-beanstorm, where you're doing some type of analysis. And that would be interviewing, surveying, doing some type of observation to understand from people, okay, what does this particular behavioral goal mean to you? We say customer obsessed. Do you know what that means and what that looks like? And it gives people the opportunity to say, no, actually, I don't, or yes, I can tell you exactly what that looks like. And then it gives them the opportunity to say, well, what gets in our way? What do we do instead? For example, with the customer obsessed, it might be we start every meeting talking about what we need to do, not who we're doing it for. So it gives people an outlet to sort of express their frustrations, but it's done in a way that's productive because you know the ultimate goal is to break down that blocker. And then it's an opportunity to say, where have we seen people leaning into this and why do we think that is? One thing that we see is most organizations actually have bean fragments already in place, and we can, through a culture sprint, provide them with bean boosters to make them even better. So there's this pre-workshop, what we call beanstorm part of the culture sprints. And then we move into a multi-day workshop. And this can either be in person, or we've run these quite successfully doing them all virtual. And this is an opportunity on day one to have people, what we call it is, adults don't think their way into new ways of acting. They act their way into new ways of thinking. Mm-hmm. So it's an opportunity to immerse people and say, let's solve a business challenge and live into these behaviors. But you don't expressively tell them that. You put in place beans without telling them they're beans. So for example, let's go back to customer obsessed. You might have them conduct some customer interviews. And then at the end of the day, you reflect on what made us so successful? How did we get here? And there's this aha moment about these behaviors helped us get here. And then that leads to the second part of the beanstorm, which follows this process of what is it that we're striving to do, getting granular about the behaviors, what's getting in our way, what do we do instead? And then, how will we hold ourselves accountable? And that's where the bean comes into play. And one thing I'll just share that is really important is oftentimes we hear what gets in the way is we don't have the resources, the time, the money, the permission. And the key is how do you get to the next level so that you can actually tackle it? Mm-hmm. So getting very granular. And then the last phase after the Beanstorm workshop is the activation, which is where you run some experiments and actually launch the beans within the organization.
I get so into this whole process. I loved the whole thing. And I can just tell our listeners are scribbling away frantically right now, trying to get all of this down, but they should definitely get the book. So as I said, I love getting into this, the whole process of innovating, all the creativity that comes out of that. As a leader, how do we reinforce the results of the sprint? After the sprint itself is over, the journey is complete. How do we make it stick?
Yes. So how do leaders reinforce this and really activate it? What I'd like to do is just draw on some of the really great advice from Paul from DBS Bank. And as he reflected, he shared, number one, I would say the sustained supportive leadership of the executive team. And a commitment to make this a programmatic and also inclusive approach. One thing that DBS Bank did and that we encourage all of our clients to do is to bring everyone along for the journey. Everyone needs to become an innovator if you're going to realize those ambitions.
Sure.
And, one way is to continuously build on the success of your programs, not always starting fresh. And it's interesting with the 5 behaviors, when we work with different organizations, oftentimes they have their own behaviors that, it might be different words, but it's the same sort of underlying concept. Mm-hmm. Then use the words that already reside in your organization, right? We say it's around culture of innovation, but it could be a culture of learning. It could be a culture of living our values, a culture of insert the blank here. Mm-hmm. And the other thing to activate this is to make it a low barrier to participate, because then people will gain confidence and it really shrinks the challenge into these micro shifts of change.
I like that. One thing I loved is that the book is great about sharing real life examples from a very diverse group of organizations who have changed their cultures and solved problems using these methods. Would you be willing to share a story or two with us to show us the kind of problems that innovation nurtured in the way that you're describing can solve?
Yes. I'll share a story from one of our no debts. So, that is another acronym, which is a normal organization doing extraordinary things. And it's a story from the Salvation Army that is profiled in the book. And I had the opportunity to go on site and interview the team from the Salvation Army Eastern Territory. And the way that we got connected with them is kind of neat. So Harvard Business Review ran what they call an idea lab, where we were able to put the concepts of the book out to a curated group for feedback to see what really hit the mark and what
Mm-hmm.
didn't. And this is how we connected with Stephen Bussey. And he shared some of the stories of what the Salvation Army was doing and went to go visit them. And he used this analogy, and it's the name of the chapter in the book, which is creating innovation chefs. He said, if you think of an Italian grandmother who is cooking and, she just implicitly knows what to do. The measurements aren't clear, but it's, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and
Mm-hmm.
the outcome is great. And you compare that with a classically trained French chef who can tell you precisely, the steps and the methods and the ingredients that go into what she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
He said, we're the Italian grandmother.
Yeah.
we're doing something
Yeah.
right, but we never really wrote it down because we're just so busy out there meeting people at the point of need.
Mm-hmm.
One of the examples he shared, him and two of his IT colleagues went to visit a local center. And the folks there were clearly struggling, frustrated, and they asked why. And they learned that even though there was a national number to call to donate items, the local offices were overwhelmed, getting something like over 60 calls per day. So, right away, they created a simple phone-based solution, just saying, press 2 to connect to donations.
Mm-hmm.
And this quick fix solved it. The volume dropped. They were able to efficiently ensure the donations found their way to people in need, and then moved from a prototype in New Jersey and scaled it. And I just love this because it's a simple idea connected to a real need that created real value.
I love that. Natalie, we're going to take a time out for another break. I definitely want to come back to this no debts concept. I love that. But we'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and our guest today is Natalie Painchaud, author of Eat, Sleep, Innovate, How to Make Creativity an Everyday Habit Inside Your Organization. And we're back with Natalie. I wanted to talk a little bit more about that no debt concept. I love that. Normal organizations doing extraordinary things. The innovation stories that we've been talking about are all about pretty large organizations. What I was wondering is, can these lessons apply to smaller organizations?
Yes. And there are so many stories that I hope, people draw inspiration from in the book, from lots of different organizations from around the world, for-profit, non-for-profit, large organizations, small organizations. So I do hope that people draw inspiration from this, because that is absolutely the goal that we had when writing this book.
Love that. One of the themes that I noticed running throughout the book is the idea of intelligent failure being rewarded instead of being punished, and the need for psychological safety throughout the process. Can you talk a little bit about that and the importance of it?
Psychological safety is hugely important, and we were over the moon to receive an endorsement from Professor Amy Edmondson, who writes about this and is really,
Mm-hmm.
the thought leader on this.
Yeah.
And psychological safety exists when people feel that they can speak up, they can offer ideas, even if they're half-baked, they can ask questions without fear of being punished or embarrassed. And to unleash creativity in an organization, you need that, right? You need to
Mm-hmm.
hear
Mm-hmm.
from people. People need to feel that their
Yeah.
idea fragments, questions, and perspectives are welcomed and not picked apart or laughed at. And I would say it was really interesting for me. I had the opportunity to immerse with DBS Bank for a month in Singapore, and just a very different culture, one that I'm not as used to, where hierarchy matters. It is not every voice necessarily speaks in a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the bean that we profile in the book, called Mojo, meeting owner, joyful observer, is just a great example of how to put in place a bean, create some intention to encourage everyone to participate and to let them know that it's okay and that it's actually really important.
Love that. And I feel like we touched on this a little bit earlier. I feel like the key to this whole innovative effort is right there in the title of the book. It's the idea of making innovation an organizational habit. So how can you tell when something has successfully become a habit for the team?
So I have a unique role wherein I do consulting and I'm also our head of learning. So I get to onboard our new hires at a boot camp. We run those twice a year. And what I would say is when someone new joins and you hear other people saying, this is how things work here, and you know it was something that you worked on and that it was intentional. And when it moves from the conscious to the unconscious, it's so rewarding when I hear people who joined a few years ago then share with our new hires what makes this place special and how things work.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great litmus test, new people.
Yeah. Then, it's really part of the culture and the way people think. I love that.
Yes.
So I wanted to mention the amazing appendix that you put together at the end of the book. It's full of actionable resources, including that diagnostic test and the bag of 101 beans. Can you tell us a little bit about the appendix and how that came to happen?
Yes. So we drew so much inspiration from researching all these different organizations. So I shared with you a couple beans, the one from Amazon. We've curated from lots of different companies, 101 beans, and we encourage you. They're actually up now on our companion website, which is eatsleepinnovate.com. So encourage you to download them, put them on your phone, flip through them for inspiration, and really make them your own. It's funny, I heard Scott saying this, so I'll say it too, but good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Right.
And so our hope is that people find some inspiration in here. And I did want to mention, we also collaborated with HBR on creating a toolkit that will be available so that anybody could run the culture sprint, the beanstorm that I mentioned earlier with their team. So that will be out shortly.
Is that going to be on the companion website as well?
Yes, there'll be a link to that.
Outstanding. Okay. So just wanted to pivot a little bit at the end here. Let's talk about Innovate and how the book ties into your work there.
Innovate's a growth strategy consultancy, and our purpose is we empower forward-thinking organizations to navigate disruptive change and own the future. We're part of a larger enterprise, Huron Consulting Group, and we collaborate across all of Huron's businesses to help our clients really imagine their future and transform for tomorrow. And maybe a couple minutes on the origin story. So we were founded by the late Professor Clayton Christensen from the Harvard Business School, who's the originator of disruptive innovation theory, and Mark Johnson. And innovation has always been at the forefront of how we help companies, help them create growth strategies, build capabilities, accelerate opportunities. And now we're just delighted to be supporting them in building a culture that really makes innovation part of how people work and a day-to-day habit.
Yeah, sounds like super inspiring work. I would get super fired up about that. So how can our listeners find out more about Innovate?
I encourage you to go to our website, innovate.com. You could register for our newsletter and also follow us on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And links to the Innovate website, to the book page, and where you can purchase Eat, Sleep, Innovate will all be included in the episode companion guide. So be sure to our listeners to sign up for that at projectionsinc.com/podcast. But right now, Natalie, it is time for our lightning round questions. These are questions we ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
I am.
All right.
I'm excited.
So our topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about creating a culture of innovation enabled by your use of the acronym BEANS. So Natalie, in your opinion, which is the better actual bean, pinto beans or jelly beans?
Definitely jelly beans. I have a sweet tooth.
All right, fair enough. So I'm curious, what's the best book you've read recently?
Oh my gosh, I've bought so many books, but the book I'm in the middle of and absolutely loving is Unleashed by Frances Fry and Anne Morris. I love everything I'm learning about reframing leadership to be about empowering everyone around you. They talk a lot about it's not about you, it's about empowering others. And I just love that message.
I love that. Now I'm the one taking notes. So tell me, what is your favorite thing about working at a management consultancy?
It's being invited in and trusted to help work on really important issues. It's a huge privilege, and I get to learn so much, meet amazing human beings, and just be of service. So it's kept me in it for a long time, and I can't believe I get to do this every day.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I can feel that. So what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
The best piece of advice I've been given is take the time to reflect. It's the best way to learn. I remind myself and share with others that learning is experience plus reflection. And I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yes, I agree. So last one, who or what inspires you?
Ideas inspire me, and collaborating and helping people to bring them to life. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't feel like work. I get to learn, be inspired, be of service when unleashing and unlocking innovation.
Great. Thanks for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR, Natalie.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really enjoyed it.
And I also want to thank our listeners. As always, this is your reminder to grab your companion guide for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be a guest on Project HR or know someone who would, feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. And to make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR, we hope you'll subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling it, drop us a line, leave us a review, or simply give us a handful of stars wherever you get your content. Last but not least, we want to remind you that November marks Project HR's 1-year anniversary. We'll be celebrating that occasion with a best of show, as well as a book giveaway where one lucky listener is going to win a copy of every single book featured on the podcast thus far. And yes, that will include Eat, Sleep, Innovate. So thanks to you, Natalie, for joining the celebration. The giveaway will begin next Wednesday. That's next Wednesday, November 4th. So be sure to check in with us then at projectionsinc.com/podcast to get the details on how to enter to win. That's it from me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.